Before painkillers, before human rights, before mercy was even a concept, what did people do to those they wanted to punish? The answer will make you grateful you were born in this century. We like to think humanity has always had a moral compass, that somewhere deep in history there were wise rulers, fair judges, and just consequences for wrongdoing. But the truth is far darker. For most of human civilization, punishment wasn't about justice. It wasn't about rehabilitation. It wasn't even really about deterrence. It was about power. About sending a message so horrifying, so visceral, so unforgettable that no one would ever dare step out of line again. And the people who designed these punishments, they were creative. Disturbingly, ingeniously, terrifyingly creative. Today, we're going inside the worst punishments ancient humans ever devised, across empires, across continents, across thousands of years of suffering. And I'll warn you now, some of these are going to be difficult to hear. We start in ancient Persia, with what many historians consider the single most horrifying method of execution ever recorded. It's called Scaphism, and it was written about by the Greek historian Plutarch, which means even the ancient Greeks, people who were no strangers to brutality, were disturbed by it. Here's how it worked. The condemned person was stripped naked and strapped between two boats, like a human sandwich floating on a swamp or stagnant pond. Their hands and feet were left sticking out over the edges. Then, and this is where it gets deeply unpleasant, they were force-fed a mixture of milk and honey until they had severe diarrhea. The same mixture was rubbed all over their exposed skin. And then they were left, on the water, in the sun. The excrement attracted insects, flies, wasps, gnats. They swarmed. They bred inside the hollow of the boat. They burrowed into the person's skin, into every opening of their body. The victim didn't die quickly. The milk and honey kept them alive, deliberately. Death could take days, sometimes weeks, from dehydration, starvation, and the consumption of their own flesh from the inside out. The most famous recorded victim was a Persian soldier named Mithridates, who allegedly survived for 17 days. 17 days. If Scaphism was the longest death, the Brazen Bull might be the most theatrical. Created in ancient Greece, specifically in Sicily, around 560 BC, it was designed by an inventor named Perillus of Athens, who presented it to the tyrant Phalaris as a gift. The device was a hollow bronze statue in the shape of a bull, life-sized, with a door on the side. The condemned person was locked inside. A fire was lit underneath. As the bronze heated up, the person inside would begin to burn alive. But here's the detail that makes this especially sick. The bowl was fitted with a series of tubes and stops near its mouth, engineered so that the screams of the person inside were converted into sounds resembling the bellowing of a real bull. The audience outside heard not the agony of a human being, but the sound of an animal. It gets worse. Phalaris was so disgusted by the inventor's twisted imagination, or perhaps threatened by it, that he reportedly locked Perillus himself inside the bull first, as a test. The creator became the first victim of his own invention. Most people know the word. Far fewer understand what it actually meant to go through it. Crucifixion in the Roman Empire wasn't just an execution method. It was a statement. It was reserved for slaves, criminals, and enemies of the state. People Rome wanted to make an example of, publicly and permanently. Before a person even reached the cross, they were flogged with a flagrum, a whip embedded with metal and bone, often to the point where internal organs were exposed. Then they were forced to carry the crossbeam, not the full cross, just the horizontal beam, to the execution site, often collapsing under its weight after losing so much blood. The nails weren't driven through the palms, as commonly depicted. Modern forensic studies suggest they went through the wrists, where bones could support the weight of a hanging body. Death came from asphyxiation. As the body sagged, the lungs compressed. The only way to breathe was to push up on the nails through your feet. So you'd push up to breathe, sag again, push up again, for hours, sometimes days. Roman soldiers would often break the legs of crucified prisoners to speed up death. When they didn't bother, it meant they wanted the suffering to last. It was not unusual for people to be left on crosses for days after death, as a warning to everyone who passed by. This one was used across multiple cultures, and it required almost no tools. Just a rat, a bucket, and patience. In its most documented form, a prisoner would be restrained, lying flat. A metal bucket or cage containing a large, hungry rat would be strapped to their stomach or chest, sealed shut. Then the outside of the bucket was heated, with hot coals, with torches. The rat, desperate to escape the heat, would do the only thing it could: dig, through whatever it was pressed against. The psychological torture was often worse than the physical. The waiting, the sounds, the knowing. Variations of this appear in Persian torture records, medieval European dungeons, and most famously, it became a recurring element of political torture in 20th century authoritarian regimes, showing that this particular evil never really went away. In Imperial China, the most severe punishment on the legal books was called Lingchi, translated loosely as slow slicing, or more dramatically, death by 1,000 cuts. It was reserved for the absolute worst crimes: treason, patricide, killing a parent or grandparent. The condemned were taken to a public execution ground. A trained executioner would use a sharp knife to remove flesh from the body, systematically, methodically, in a predetermined order and number of cuts. Historical records debate the exact number, anywhere from 24 to over 3,000 in ceremonial accounts, though most actual executions were much shorter. The goal was to keep the person alive as long as possible while removing them piece by piece. Opium was sometimes administered, not out of mercy, but to ensure the prisoner remained conscious. What makes Lingchi particularly significant historically is that it wasn't just punishment. It carried deep spiritual weight. In Chinese belief, the body needed to be intact for the afterlife. Lingchi didn't just kill a person. It was designed to destroy them in every possible dimension: physical, social, and spiritual. It remained a legal punishment in China until 1905. Medieval Europe had a punishment called the breaking wheel, also known as the Catherine wheel, and it became so common that it was practically a standard fixture of public justice for centuries. A large wooden wheel, similar to a wagon wheel, was laid flat or mounted upright on a post. The condemned was tied to it, spread eagle. Then an executioner would use a heavy hammer or iron-shod wheel to systematically break every major bone in the body, starting at the extremities, working inward, deliberately avoiding immediately fatal blows. Once broken, the person would often be woven through the spokes of the wheel, their limbs bent at grotesque angles, and raised on a post for public display. They could survive in this state for hours, days. Birds would often begin feeding on them while they were still conscious. The breaking wheel was used across Germany, France, England, and Russia. Its final recorded use in Europe was in 1841 in Germany, less than 200 years ago. At the start of this video, I asked you one question. What did people do to those they wanted to punish before painkillers, before human rights, before mercy was even a concept? Now you know. And here's the uncomfortable truth that historians keep coming back to. Every single one of these punishments was carried out by ordinary people. They were legal. They were watched by crowds. They were sometimes even celebrated. The people who designed them weren't monsters from another species. They were us, just in a different time, under different systems, with different ideas about who deserved to suffer. That's not a comfortable thought, but it's an important one. Because the history of punishment is really the history of power and how far people will go when there's no one to stop them. If this kind of deep dive into history is something you want more of, the uncomfortable truths, the dark chapters, the stories that textbooks skip, then subscribe, because that's exactly what this channel is built for.